Thank you for being here today. We're pleased to announce a injection well bill that we are all working on in Columbus. This is in conjunction with our local Township Trustees Association, as well as with Randy Smith's office, our friends up in Ashtabula County, as well as our neighbors, and concerns that we have been expressed to our offices regarding the injection wells and some of the regulations. With me is some of our sponsors on the bill, Michael Bryan and John Patterson from Ashtabula. This bill is designed to put in common sense regulations to an industry that is, we believe, does need some regulations codified in order to make sure that they are safe. Part of the bill in the outline, and the way we're going to do this press conference is I'm going to outline the bill very quickly, and then the other two gentlemen are going to stand up and talk about some more of the specifics of the bill. The bill is going to put in, again, as we talked about, common sense approaches. We're talking about putting in no injection wells in a 100-year floodplain. We're talking about GPS on the brine trucks to make sure that the trucks are going where they say they're going, and we're able to have real-time verification of that. Seismic testing to be done. The testing will be in real time. So if there is a seismic event that does occur, we can take immediate action right then and there in real time. And that will be monitored by ODNR in Columbus. We're also looking at the vaults. As many of you know, we've had issues here in Trumbull County with underground storage. This bill will take care of underground storage, and that we will no longer permit that type of storage. So spills that we had at KDA will be able to, they won't happen because we're going to take care of that. There will be testing, dye testing, so if a well does spill, we will know almost immediately that there is some type of spill and we can fix it. Part of the problem that we had at KDA is that the spill was ongoing and no one knew about it for several days. And because of that, the brine level was able to permeate further than we would want. And by having these dye tests in there, we'll be able to see that and be able to fix the problem immediately. One important part of this bill is it is still pending. We've introduced it, but it's fluid right now. We are working with interested parties in Columbus. We're working with our Township Trustees Association. We're working with our county engineer, Randy Smith, who has been vanguard of this issue, and has, with Jack Simon and Steve Paplis, really been working and keeping us informed on it. And then we were working with our environmental council and oil and gas, because I think and they recognize that when you have bad actors out there, it hurts their business. So those are pretty much the steps of what we're looking and what we're trying to accomplish and why. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Patterson and then Representative O'Brien, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Representative O'Brien, and it's nice to be flanked by O'Briens here in Trumbull County. And I represent Ashtabula County, and water quality is critically important to us on the lake. In addition to the lake, we have 3 rivers or creeks, Conneaut Creek, the Ashtabula River, and the Grand River that run through Ashtabula County. And this is why especially that 100-year floodplain is so important. Right now, an injection well could be located in such an area, and it's critically important to get this right. The other issue that's important is the fact that many of our individuals in northern Trumbull County and in Ashtabula County rely on wells for their domestic consumption of water. So we have to make sure that it is safe in that regard. To speak to that issue, groundwater monitoring is critically important. We need to know when or if there is such a leak so that we can get on top of that right away. Critically important to ensure a safe drinking water supply for our individual, because as you know, without safe water, things are going to be paralyzed. I want to emphasize the fact that we're trying to strike a balance here between economic progress and energy independence that Ohio's oil and gas industry brings to all of us, and the job creation. balancing that with environmental preservation too, especially for you young people. I'm so glad that as a former high school teacher, I'm glad you're involved in this process. Kudos to you and your staff members. But the important thing here is that in Ashtabula County, we're very sensitive to this because we have had a number of, oh my gosh, help me here,
Incidents.
not only incidents, but the Superfund sites, that's what I was looking for, Superfund sites that have created some environmental challenges for us. And along the lake, there are the remnants of the defense industry, factories that are now, some of them, idle. And we've had some issues with the tributaries, Field Brook in particular, that runs into the Ashtabula River and then, of course, feeds the lake. So environmental preservation, coupling that with economic progress is what we're trying to do here, especially with water quality. Mm-hmm. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mike O'Brien.
Thanks, John. And as John and Sean both mentioned, in the striking the balance, and you know, if everyone remembers years ago, we were talking about the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shale industry, and the brine, and we were talking about economic development, and falling short of in this bill, which is good, is falling short in the past of how this balance is struck with the safety issues of groundwater, as John Patterson mentioned and Sean O'Brien alluded to earlier. As important in this bill is the notification, not just with the county engineer, but notification of any injection wells to the county commissioners and to the township trustees. And now this, to be completely transparent, all county commissioners, all township trustees that are affected with this injection well industry will now be notified, and it's going to be in law that they have to be notified. And that's important in the constituency of their relationship with their particular elected officials in their community. And the last thing we would want is for an elected official, when asked about an injection well in their township, well, I don't really know what you're talking about. Now, in this bill is there has to be notification, not just with the county engineer and with the township, with the county commissioners, but with the township officials that this process is going to be taking place in their township. So to be completely transparent, be completely open about what's going on in this industry as it relates to the elected officials. So that's a key component of this bill also. So, Sean, you want to walk up and take some questions?
There's one other provision that I want to make sure is in there, is that we have setbacks from dwellings that was also in the bill, because currently under Ohio law in regards to injection wells, there is no setback requirement. We have put a 2,000-foot minimum standard on the putting an injection well near a dwelling. So that's another important aspect of the bill. With that, we would open it up to any questions.
Sean, Mike, Representative Patterson, haven't we been through this before, initially before DNL Energy and that issue, and then after, when everyone was concerned over the issues that were going on with that and the dumping of waste? What, A, haven't we been through this, and B, what does this bring that isn't already on the book?
Well, this is putting a lot of those concerns that we've seen with DNL and with KDA, for instance, and one example would be the vault, the underground storage. That was determined to be part of the leak that occurred. This bill would outlaw that. There was no dye in that water from KDA, so it was able to go, I think, at least a mile, mile and a half, maybe further, into a neighbor's pond before it was discovered. That had we had the dye in there, we would have seen that occur. So there are lessons that we have learned from DNL. There are lessons that we have learned from KDA, and there are lessons that we, talking with the interested parties here and in Columbus and Ashtabula, that we are now putting into the bill that we didn't have before. when we first were talking with the bill on interested parties, it really became the oil and gas companies that said, you should outlaw these vaults, not outlaw them, but prohibit them. So those discussions have created what we believe is a very comprehensive bill. Part of it too is that as we're moving forward, this bill's still being, it's going to go through the committee process and is still being vetted, and there's still other, I believe, amendments that may be put onto it to strengthen it as well. We're still talking with Chief of the Division of Oil and Gas at ODNR, Richard Simmons. We're talking, Simmers, I'm sorry. And then we're talking with other interested parties. So it's still going on. We're still learning to answer your question, there are lessons that are being brought into this bill, I think, that are important.
I think, Jerry, to answer your question too, and just to dovetail what Sean said, is the fact that with DNL and KDA, the industry had some ideas and processes that need to, the industry, those law-abiding members of the industry, how this could be prevented in the future. And these problems that were experienced there could be prevented in the future by introducing these particular safeguards in a new bill. So, as Sean mentioned, lesson learned, but the people in the industry that are proactive and safe in that industry were actually forthcoming that with different ideas how to make sure it's safer in that industry.
I'd like to add a different element to your question, too. We're also looking down the road. If you have been aware of what's going on in Ashtabula County, Norfolk and Southern is essentially closing down the coal docks. Why? Because we are steering away from coal. We still have a need for energy consumption, and down the road, there are two things that come to mind. One, power plants that are fueled by natural gas that we have a great abundance of right here in Ohio. And secondly, I can see a time when we're moving away from traditional oil consumption with respect to automobiles into CNG, and on the Great Lakes, liquefied natural gas because of the Tier 3 environmental restrictions that the federal government is putting forth. Bottom line is, for domestic consumption and for international reasons, to wean ourselves off our overdependence on foreign oil and gas, this makes sense. But that is going to necessitate a burgeoning oil and gas industry here in Ohio, and the problem with that is there's going to be additional waste. And our issue here is, because we're located on the frontier, if you will, with Pennsylvania, we accept out-of-state brine. And in Ashtabula County, I can tell you that there are several wells that are located within a mile or two of the Pennsylvania line, and we're going to be accepting that because of the interstate supremacy clause in the U.S. Constitution, and effectively.
The fact that, as you said, you're getting those in the industry encouraging some of this, will that, because there's always the obvious R&D involved in Columbus, that their support and perhaps pressure on the other side will get both houses to go along with it?
Sure, and that's when we are working with Al Landis and his committee that this will go through. I'm ranking member, and we will be talking with our counterparts on the other side of the aisle, because this issue is not just a D or R issue, it's an environmental issue, it's an economic issue, and it needs to be addressed. If we continue without regulations and accidents like KDA or DNL occur, it hurts the industry, which hurts the economy, and obviously hurts the environment. So this is what the companies and what the, I think is beneficial for them to get on board to understand if they don't do it, they have the bad actors, then you're going to see more problems, and it's going to hurt the development of oil and gas in our area.
And keep in mind, we're working with the environmentalists as well as the people in the oil and gas industry. So, you know, we're balancing both ends of this.
It seems like ODNR has indicated that they are working on some things themselves. And I don't know how that was going to transpire, whether they were going to contact legislators and say, here's what we'd like to do. Are they also working on a parallel track somewhere else?
We have talked with ODNR the director, Jim Zeringer, and then we have met with the, as I said, the chief of the division. He's part of these conversations. So they are working on their own, but they're looking at perhaps using our bill as a vehicle. That's still to be determined depending on how this bill moves through, and whether or not they're going to try and impose some of these requirements through their own rules and regulations. But ODNR is at the table, the environmentalists are at the table, the industry's at the table, and both sides of the aisle are going to be at the table. So we're going to try and do a comprehensive inclusion bill.
And we've been working on this for quite some time. In fact, my involvement goes back to my first term immediately in office, trying to figure out a way to, again, seek that balance. But it was given even more relevancy this past summer when township trustees approached us to do something about this with a greater supremacy than one that they could muster to the table, so that we could have a safer environment for everyone.
We had, I just wanted to say, we did have open meetings up in Ashtabula where our township trustees attended and theirs as well, and environmentalists, and we sat down and listened to a lot of their concerns. And again, that's what's in this bill, is everyone bringing their concerns and bringing the bills and the problems that we're seeing, the lessons that we're learning to the table to get it into this type of bill.
How will having this as a state law help, really, because so often we hear them say, well, we have to follow state laws or we have to follow these laws that are set in place. How will having this in a bill really help with, instead of just the regulatory agencies coming up with a few of their own minutes?
And I think you just answered it there, because now we have in law what the rules are, not just what the agency thinks they are. And I think that's very important, especially when we're looking at well construction and some of the other, things that are in this bill. And again, it goes back to that we're still working with ODNR. We're still having ongoing conversations. 422, this bill is a conduit to get to a end result that will help not just the industry and protect our environment, but make sure that we are safe. And that's the fundamental what we all want.
Going back to what I said earlier, state KDA, township trustees are called immediately and want some answers. Well, and the constituents say, well, why weren't they notified? Well, I don't know what this law now, it's mandatory they be notified. County commissioners be notified. And of course, working with the engineer's office. But so, again, Janet, to your point is now these things are mandatory. And again, as Sean mentioned, John Patterson mentioned, there are going to be some tweaks along the way to make it stronger and to make it, to strengthen the legislation of ideas. And also there's going to be discussion back and forth. But what's going to be important is what we represent Ashtabula and Trumbull County. There's going to be an educational process with us to people that live in Montgomery County, Wood County, Adams County, Augalaize County, because the rest of the state of Ohio is not affected with these types of issues. So they're going to say, brine, injection wells, storage tanks, vaults, regarding what? Well, they're not exposed to any of these things. And this is going to be a state law, so there's going to be an educational process that takes place with the committees and with representatives, two other representatives.
Yes. It was introduced last week, and it is House Bill 422.
When do you expect it to go?
When we get back, we'll have, probably within a month, we'll have sponsor testimony, and then we will then begin the regular committee meetings of having people come down and testify. At least, yeah, about 6 weeks. I mean, because you got to understand the schedule that we're on, and with the May or March primary, it kind of throws us off a little bit. Jack?
Yeah, more of a statement than a question. Just about a year ago, that the Township Association of Trumbull County appointed Dominic Marquez, a Johnson Township trustee, to head up a committee to address these. We since accepted people from Ashtabula County, Portage County, Summit County, come to find out that Trumbull County has more injection wells than the entire state of Pennsylvania. So that's what started this forward. I remember the first meeting we had, Mike O'Brien came and said, out of the 88 counties in Ohio, this is probably the only county having a meeting about this. And
Right.
it's probably true. That's what you just said. What Jerry said earlier about only having, bringing those north on from DNL Energy and KDA, it only made us more aware of how unregulated this part of the industry was. So at the time of that first meeting, we were given the draft rule changes by the ODNR, by Rick Simmons. There's still draft rule changes. Moving forward, if this expediency is, or supremacy as you would say, is much appreciated. We appreciate the effort you're putting. We still would like something in there to deal with the roads. As you know, my job with the county engineer's office deals with the roads, the road use maintenance agreement. We've come to find out that the saltwater injection wells take much more traffic than a horizontal well.
Sure.
Sure, it takes it immediately, but over the life of a saltwater injection well, we're getting much more traffic. So I just want to say that we greatly appreciate on behalf of the engineer's office and the Township Association Committee, who's actually meeting tomorrow to discuss this that you introduced. We greatly appreciate you moving forward in such a quick manner. We're getting much more headway with you than we did with the ODNR. They're listening to us, but you're making action, and we greatly appreciate that. So on behalf of the Township Association and the County Engineer's Office, I'm just going to tell you thank you, and we'll look forward to working with you further on this.
We appreciate that. And I can't stress enough how important the engineer, Randy Smith, and his staff has been on this issue. They've mobilized with the Township Trustees Association. I know Jack has been leading that effort and keeping us informed on some of the concerns that they have, and we appreciate that. Mr. Holmes?
Yes, on behalf of the Mahoney River Mayor's Association, we represent mayors in Trumbull and Mahoney County along the Mahoney River. We appreciate the Township Trustee Association and what the state delegation is doing on behalf of injection wells. The one that happened with DNL, think about the efforts that was there in McDonald. Initially, it happened to be in Youngstown, but all along the Mahoney River, we have a brownfield that could be retrofitted to injection wells. So appreciate that. We would also like you to consider air quality monitoring and aquifer.
That is in there.
Sure.
And then just thank you, Mr. Mayor, and for your efforts, because I know that when that happened, you were on the phone to me right away, and then we were on with the governor's office after that. But we are addressing also air quality and water testing also in the bill. That is in part of the bill.
Can you explain how you work this GPS system? Trucks moving back.
So the GPS, as you know, real-time monitoring, the GPS would show where the truck went. It picked up brine, let's say in Pennsylvania. You could then follow it all the way to make sure it's on the route that it was said it was going to be on. And then it would go to the well station, and then you could see how long it sat there. The concern there is what if the truck pulls over, opens the valve up, puts it right into a tributary of some type, or just spills it on the ground. We'll be able to know that because we have real-time monitoring, and that's a concern we want to make sure doesn't happen. And then you'll be able to follow that truck all the way to the well. Now, the logs are done now. They know the weight, and we're able to tell that too. But with the GPS, it's real time. We know immediately, okay, this truck stopped on Route 11 for 20 minutes. Why did it do that? And it came in 50,000 barrels or whatever the number is, lower than what we thought it would have at the site. And we could then go right to where it was stopped, do testing, ascertain, hey, there's a spill that coincides with what they were carrying, and then we can take action. Well, what we're looking at, we're not saying retro. A lot of trucks already have it, and the big companies already have it. As we move forward, then trucks, as they get licenses or permitted, will then have to have the GPS. But most of the vehicles that we're seeing now have them anyway. So
DHL and some of the typical commercial carriers have them. But the key phrase to remember here, what we're driving at, is cradle-to-grave disposal of the waste. We want to know where it is at all times.
Is there, you mentioned, Sean, one of the things you're looking at with this is real-time seismic monitoring.
yeah.
Doesn't ODNR do that now?
They do it now, but we want to make sure that you get a different chief or something else. We want to make sure it stays in there, and that's
Something that stays,
yeah.
just
Put in law.
Who's actually
Right.
That's right.
Right. We don't know who the next chief will be, but we want to make sure that's part of the regulations.
Could I go back to the rumors for a moment?
Absolutely.
There's another issue with the rumors that are a deep concern to me, and that's the increased traffic of these trucks coming in. Now, we have some wells in Ashtabula County in the midst of a large Amish population. And there have been some near misses with Amish buggies because they're coming in at various hours. And some of our Amish sects are still using gas lamps and not necessarily LED lighting. So it's the amount of traffic and the safety of those individuals, everybody sharing those same roads. So quality of roads and the flow of traffic that's safe is of concern.
It's very important to us. We have several wells in Trumbull County that are in school areas and they interfere with school bus traffic.
Right.
And there have been accidents, but they've happened anyways, that the increase in truck traffic just makes it harder, to see around trucks and make it up and right. And again, it's all location, location, location. We border Pennsylvania. We're going to have this problem because they're governed not by the ODNR but by the federal EPA.
Right.
So, ours is governed by Ohio, so we're going to get it, but there's no, it's just, the amount of regulations we can put on it, with, especially when it comes to women. Yes, traffic is important, accident rate is important, but the roads are just getting torn apart. You can see the ingress road to a well is sunken in, well, when they're going out empty, it's just fine. So the road repair is very important to us as well as safety. Safety is number one.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
I'll probably answer this question at a different time, but this is on my mind when I ask it now. In a production well, you need 640 acres to combine to create a well. And then injection well, you don't need that. Has there been given any thought to maybe expanding that footprint to maybe allow more people that are profiting to profit from it, and then spread that extra dollars out to aquifer testing, water quality monitoring, stuff like that?
I think there's a Supreme Court decision on that issue that addresses that. So it's not addressed in this bill. Ed?
Mike, we're talking about notifying townships and county commissions. Are you talking about when an injection well is being proposed? Or are
Right.
you talking about after there's an accident?
No, when it's proposed. Like for instance, situation is a constituent calls and said, hey, what's this concrete pad for? Well, that's the beginning of an injection well, but the point is now when the application is submitted, that the township trustees, county commissioners, and of course the engineer has been notified, but the county commissioners, trustees will be notified at application.
I'll give you a concrete example. We had an application process, and by law, they were required to put a notice in the paper that made it to the newspaper, and nobody caught it. When I say nobody, any of the elected officials and a constituent happened to catch it in the fine print and called up the local officials and said, what's up with this? And it really was embarrassing for us not to, and this was in Conneaut, within the Conneaut city limits, I might add, within a quarter mile of Conneaut Creek. And of course, we took action immediately, and nothing became of it. But if we are going to be the elected leaders, we ought to be involved in that right from the very beginning, and not to have that knowledge up front is problematic. So that's why we're concentrating on this advance notice for electeds.
Whose responsibility would it be to notify you guys?
Well, the notification would be when the permit process goes out. So currently what happens is the county engineer gets a notice, but that's it. So what we're trying to do here is all elected officials would be noticed. And what we've talked with the chief of the division, and what he's suggesting, and we may do, is that if someone wants to find out, so State Representative Sean O'Brien wants to know when a well's coming in, they're talking about putting up a new system that I would put an email in saying, any injection wells that are in Ashtabula or Trumbull County, notify me.
Right.
So it's a new progress, it's a new system that they're looking at, it hasn't been developed yet, but it may be something that we then change the bill to modify that, so that when the injection well, if a permit comes in, it automatically sends me an email saying, permit requested at State Route 7 in Brookfield at ... and then instantly I'm notified, as soon as that permit goes in.
Was there also something about being notified if there's an accident? Was that part of this bill too?
No, there's not notification as far as if,
Just trying to clarify, couldn't tell if Mike was saying that there was something like that.
No.
Those safeguards are already.
They're
That's
already-
already in
yeah.
place.
This is more preemptive.
Can you describe that dye principle you were talking about with underground vaults and
Well,
above ground tanks too.
yeah, so when a truck comes in and it has the dye in it already, when it puts it into the well and there's a spill, for instance, KDA, if they put it into a storage facility or some type of storage because they have to build up the pressure, you know, you can't overstimulate the well. So it has to sit here as the pressure is sending it down. If there's a leak, we'll be able to see.
You're saying all the brine that's on the facility will have some dye in it?
Yes.
That will be, that's
When-
not like an extraordinarily expensive thing?
No, it's relatively not expensive. It's a chemical makeup that when you put it in there, it's, I forget the color, but there is a color that you will be able to see clearly if there's leakage. And I think the companies would want this because it's a lot cheaper to clean it up as soon as it happens and stop it and
Right.
fix it versus, you know, days of it spilling and then having to clean up what KDA, I can't imagine what their costs are out there, but to scoop the ground up, to clean it, to send it to a landfill, to treat it, you know, a whole different way than they normally would. I think the companies would want this.
I would also think the insurance companies that represent the companies
Are you
would also want that.
suggesting the brine have this dye as it's initially injected, so then when it's extracted back out, it has it already, or how?
Well, so what we're saying is when the truck pulls up, there's a dye when they get it. So they go and they go to,
Dye in the truck.
right, they'll have it
that
in it,
mixes with what they're pulling out.
right. So we'll be able to figure that out.
And that ties in with the groundwater monitoring
absolutely.
wells that would be enhanced with this particular bill, and we have added a slight fee to provide for that service to take place, so that if there were any seepage, we would know about it well in advance of potentially a catastrophic situation.
You described a vault at KDA. I'm not sure I heard that term used before. So are those like underground?
Underground
tanks? Are they
storage.
like the ones you'd see above ground, only they're down under the
I'm
ground?
sure they're designed different, but they're underground storage tanks. But that's how they were referred to us from an industry term was vaults.
What's the problem with them being underground? You just can't.
Well,
see
you
them.
can't see it, and if there's leakage, you don't have the tile, or if there's a rip in the tile underneath or the liner, and it's able to permeate those, you know, soils and then leak, as we saw at KDA, down into the, you know, the system, the ecosystem, and that's kind of why we want to make sure that these aren't used anymore.
Right.
Similar.
Similar.
I mean, not
Similar concept,
exactly, but I
right.
mean, the same
Yep.
idea.
Yeah, underground storage.
And one thing, and this is something that has come up recently in talking with Chief Simmers, is that we are looking at having these designed, these, as new wells go in, having an engineer sign off on them. As of right now and today, there is no requirement that an engineer sign off and have it scientifically created. And that is a concern that, you know, as we're learning about this system, we thought that was already done. So that probably will be an amendment that's placed on the bill.
There's a question over there.
What if there was a leak or any sort of seismic activity that would happen within, around the well, or kind of around an area of a well, or many, like multiple wells, is there a contingency plan to notify either township trustees or any sort of other people that would be involved in that if there was a leak or seismic activity at all?
So what happened, and I'll give you an example. DNL out in near McDonald in Youngstown, there was seismic activity, and I think it was a 4 earthquake. Well, one, everyone felt it, so they're like, what's that? But the testing that we now have and will require to maintain would pick that up in real time. ODNR would immediately call the well and say shut down, depending on what, you know, the activity. Then the notifications already are in place that ODNR would go out and immediately evaluate what's going on at the well. Emergency, hazmat, or whoever, whatever is needed at that time will be initiated, and then it would be given to the elected officials to understand what is going on, what the steps were. In KDA's, what happened there is after the leak was ascertained and it was coming from KDA's site, EPA, Ohio EPA, has an emergency response team that came in, immediately tested, found out where it was coming from, and immediately took action, and then notified the rest of us, and as well as the emergency response.
But is there any sort of, like, township trustee notification as well, along with the well notification with that?
There's nothing that's codified specifically as far as I know. What would happen is EPA notifies through their course of regulations. They would call the township trustees. They would call the emergency management of Trumbull County, for instance, and the local fire department. And usually through that process, the township trustees find out real fast that something's going on.
And let me pick up on that, because what we're dealing with here is a fundamental risk management issue. Now, did any of you walk to school today? Very good. The rest of us used either a bus or we drove here, correct? Which means we are all dependent upon gasoline, and we heat our homes. The bottom line is that that's the reality in which we live. In order to extract this gas, there's a certain amount of risk with anything we do. Our bill is designed to minimize that risk so that we can have the energy independence we need without sacrificing the safety that we need as well. So this has been one of the things that has caused us to move forward on this, knowing that economic issues and job creations, we want you to have good paying jobs right here in Trumbull and Ashtabula counties, things that you'll want to stay and help rebuild us from the inside out. But to do that and to take advantage of this energy source that is unimaginable. In fact, we've heard some reports that this gas reserve that we have may be one of the biggest reserves in the world. It's virtually untapped. But to balance that, prospects for you and the safety for all of us is really critical. So I want to emphasize that.
I think we need to discuss this seismic notification a little further. So appreciate the great question, because we might be discussing this further.
Any other questions or any? Well, again, we'd like to thank all of you for being here, TCTC for hosting us and having us and let us use this facility. Mayor Glenn Holmes and Randy Smith's office and our sponsors. So thank you very much for being here today.